Hey, everybody. Good morning. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. As always, welcome to Resistance Live. Very happy to be here with all of you on Friday the 13th. Y'all know I'm a little superstitious, but not about this particular day. My daughter actually was born on a Friday the 13th. So in any event, welcome. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Last night was the Democratic debates, but I want to start with a really important breaking issue, which we got news of just this morning, and it is this. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals has revived a lawsuit that was filed by a number of hospitality businesses in the District Court for the Southern District of New York concerning the emoluments that the president has been receiving through his hotel chain. This is a really big decision. It's being litigated, by the way, by CREW, the Center for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Some very good lawyers have been working on this case. That also, by the way, is the place where Walt Shaw, many of you know him, he's the former head of the Office of Government Ethics, works right now. This particular legal case is incredibly significant. And the ruling itself out of the Second Circuit is, I have skimmed it. It is a lockstep, well-written opinion, no surprises, because the Second Circuit is considered one of the premier circuit courts of appeals in the federal system. So no surprises that the decision is well drafted, but it's very interesting. It was argued over a year ago. The decision just dropped today. The lower court judge is a fellow by the name of Judge Daniels, who, ironically enough, I had a case pending in front of that took 10 years to resolve. So I'm very familiar with the lower court judge in this case, who is the one who kicked this out of court. The Second Circuit today gave a resounding slamming. Fundamentally, they overturned Judge Daniels. They overturned every aspect of his rationale, and they sent the court back down to the case back down to the lower courts. From where we find ourselves right now, there's a very significant chance that this case will, of course, there will at least be an effort to appeal it to the Supreme Court of the United States. That effort, it will come in the form of a writ of certiorari, which we have talked about quite a bit on this broadcast. That is where you basically apply to have your appeal heard in front of the Supreme Court. It is up to the Supreme Court to decide, however, whether or not they will take the case. And if they choose not to take the case in this instance, that will mean that the Court of Appeals decision stands and the case can go to trial. So again, very significant development. The Supreme Court may choose to hear the appeal. They may not. We actually don't even know whether or not the lawyers are planning to appeal it who are on the side of the president on this particular one. But for where we are right now, it's a very good day. I'm just very happy about this decision. I feel like it sets a really good precedent. And on the issue of emoluments, it's very dramatic. So we'll see whether or not the lawyers are seeking to pull together an appeal on this. If they do not, the case goes back to the lower court. If the Supreme Court rejects a petition for certiorari, it goes back down to the trial court. And we'll go from there. Now, I will say one thing about this, however. Judge Daniels, as I just mentioned, the lower court judge, is known for being one of the slowest judges in the Southern District of New York. That's why I'm saying, like, the case I had in front of him was pending for 10 years before we got a ruling, which is insane. He was actually profiled on the front page of the New York Times while I was still practicing law on Wall Street as being the slowest judge on the bench to reach determinations on cases. So the only thing that's of concern here from the standpoint of this case is that if it does go back down to the trial court, it may take quite some time to reach a resolution. That doesn't mean that the case might not settle. It doesn't mean that there might not be efforts made by the plaintiffs in this case to push it forward very quickly. But fundamentally, decisions on substantive issues, trial dates, and the like lie totally within the discretion of the judge. So there's a little bit of a reason to be concerned about it going back down to the trial court, but fundamentally the legal decision today out of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals is very good. And so, like I said, I'm optimistic and hopeful about that as a decision for today. Okay, we had a question today about, and we've actually had this question a couple of times before on the broadcast, but I'm going to do a little bit of a reboot on it because we've had a number of questions about it over the last few days. The issue of high crimes and misdemeanors and how it's defined is one that has come up a number of times. So let me just say this. What constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors is sort of anybody's guess. I mean, presumably any felony or significant misdemeanor, like not a parking ticket, right, could get you impeached. We have to keep in mind here that, in the way in which impeachment has happened in the past, it has been defined as particular types of violations that concern criminal activity or character. So obstruction of justice, for instance, has been a count in an article of impeachment. Abuse of power, meaning like using the DOJ to investigate your political rivals. That was one of them under Nixon. Okay, that in and of itself is considered a high crime and misdemeanor. But fundamentally, this is one of the reasons, and I will remind you all, why the articles of impeachment have to be carefully crafted. Articles of impeachment are ordinarily written much like an indictment. And that is because we want them to meet the arguable definition of what constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors. I will just let all of you know that campaign finance fraud is also something that could be a high crime and misdemeanor. And we have like dozens of potential allegations right now that would satisfy that standard. So we don't actually have to worry, if that's where the motivation for the question is coming, we don't actually have to worry at this point about whether or not there's substantial enough allegations against the president to satisfy high crimes and misdemeanors. Keep in mind the way that clause reads is treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So I personally am not particularly concerned about that language in the Constitution. I don't think we're going to have any trouble meeting it in this particular instance. Okay. As for the debates, so last night was a very interesting night. I will tell you that I'm not going to do a huge overview on takeaways. You know, you all know I'm in the camp of Elizabeth Warren. I will tell you that I feel like the only major takeaway that I have from last night is that Joe Biden doesn't know what he's doing. And you know, I really feel as though that answer that he gave last night, particularly about systemic and historical racism, and the way in which he fundamentally attacked the capacity of people of color to parent in that answer, was an incredible gaffe on his part. And just a sign, by the way, of how unprepared he is to really address some of the fundamental and critical societal issues that will confront this next president, including on issues like reparations. So I was disappointed in that. You know, I think that there's plenty of debate this morning about who won that debate. You know, Warren obviously performed well. She should have gotten more time. Kamala performed well. You know, there's a big kerfuffle this morning about Julian Castro taking Biden to task. But, you know, personally, I will tell you that I continue to be largely pleased with this field. I would like to see Joe Biden drop out. I would like to see Bernie Sanders clear the way, fundamentally, for a woman and perhaps a woman of color or a person of color to get the nomination here. I don't think at this moment in time that Joe Biden should be the nominee, and it's fundamentally time for him to step aside. So those are my big takeaways from last night. There was something that happened in the middle of the debates that everyone should be aware of, which is that there was a political ad that ran on a number of ABC stations around the country that showed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's image being set on fire, and then showed skulls and bones behind her, and then had an overt statement about socialism. It's a very violent image graphically, an ad graphically. And I'm actually quite surprised that the ABC stations that aired it approved it, because it is so obviously basically calling for violence against AOC. Add to that the fact that the language within it, even though it was spoken by a woman of color, was absolutely a dog signal to white supremacists. It's a profoundly disturbing ad, and there's a huge outcry about it this morning. And fundamentally, we need to understand that the freedom of speech that is guaranteed under the First Amendment has limits. And if you are inciting violence, you know, this is the famous shouting fire in a crowded theater example that comes out of case law. Your free speech can be cut off. This is a situation where that ad should have been refused. Now, I understand there is some discussion this morning about Sinclair Broadcasting, which you all know is an incredibly right-wing media company that owns a number of a lot of local stations around the country. That is, by the way, the company that was in trouble last year for forcing anchors to do pieces favorable to President Trump. It was on Sinclair Broadcasting stations that this ad aired. We still can voice our opinion to ABC about the fact that this ad aired anywhere on an ABC network, a station, and we should. And I'll just let you all know that on the Resistance Live comment feed this morning, the phone number for ABC has been posted, and I encourage you all to use it. The outrage about this is substantial, it is significant, and it should be. Right? It should be. It's calling for violence against a sitting member of Congress and a woman of color sitting member of Congress. And, you know, obviously a figure that the right wing loves to tear apart. But, you know, she Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, the squad, Rashida Tlaib, they have all had very significant death threats. There is someone who actually went to prison for threatening the life of Ilhan Omar this year. So, again, just incredibly important to use your voice on this one, and to help keep people safe. That it never should have aired in the first place. Okay, I had a request to talk about the Andrew McCabe threat of indictment situation. So I'm not actually sure this is going to come to pass, but there are indications that Andrew McCabe may be indicted shortly by the Department of Justice. I will tell you all that my initial reaction to this, and this will come as no surprise to all of you, was that this is a political revenge tactic by the president. And we know that he, again, remember that one of the things that's discussed in the Mueller report, one of the things that that has been floated repeatedly is the use of the DOJ to investigate political rivals. Reminder from earlier in the broadcast, that was one of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon. The president is looking for every reason to discredit investigations into his criminality and the fact that he is compromised. This is one strategy that he may use. Do I think that if Andy McCabe is indicted, that case is going to go to trial? Probably not. Do I think that there's going to be adequate evidence to support an indictment if the DOJ is even able to get one? Probably not. And I will remind you all that indictments that come out of the grand jury have a much lower standard of proof than criminal trials. So I am at this point in time not terribly concerned about it, other than from the standpoint of the president using the Department of Justice as his own personal vengeance animal, a machine. And that in and of itself should scare all of us. And it is impeachable, by the way. If he instructed the DOJ to go indict Andy McCabe because he's mad about Andy McCabe's role in the Mueller probe, that in and of itself is an impeachable offense. So again, I think we take it as a sign of what's happening inside the government. But from the place that we sit right now, there's not a lot that we can do about it. And again, it's one of those moments where, I have to say the thing I've been saying for the last 3 years, basically, which is none of this stops until he's gone. All right. So with all of that, there's a couple of quick things that I just want to mention to all of you right now. There is, and Lynn, you're posting the NBC phone number, not the ABC phone number. It's ABC stations, not NBC. Sorry. Looking at the comments, scrolling by as I'm doing this. One of the things that I just want to make really clear to all of you from an organizing standpoint is that I am seeing more and more right now opportunities to train on canvassing, going door to door, advocating for political candidates. Many of you are sending me stuff on trainings that have been done. Blue Wave Coalition in particular is doing a lot of this in Florida. There are other organizations that are training people, including local Democratic Party arms and local candidates that are training people to do this work right now. It's incredibly important. Just incredibly important that we access the training that we need right now for all these kinds of purposes. And I talked about this in the context of the North Carolina election that went down this week, and that 65% of North Carolina eligible voters did not vote in this election. You're going to hear me talk about this a lot. I know that it's going to sound repetitive to those of you who are here watching every day, but I am adamant right now that we need to get trained right now on canvassing, getting out the vote, getting people to the polls like today, right now, a year before the 2020 election, so that we're all ready to hit the ground running, now. And I'll also just add that Postcards to Voters has a number of new campaigns that are available. If you yourself, for whatever reason, cannot leave your home, or you want to do a party in your house rather than going door to door with your neighbors, the Postcards to Voters people are sending me information all the time. Many of you are posting about what you're doing all the time. And so I just want to encourage you to spend a little bit of time this weekend, just a little bit, researching where locally you can go to get trained if you have not been trained already. And consider your local candidates who are running for office. There are some incredibly key races, both in the Senate and in the House, by the way. Let's not forget about the House. We have to maintain the majority we have in the House and hopefully grow it. In your local area that you may want to work on. And I mean, around the country, there are incredibly important races, like Amy McGrath in Kentucky, who's seeking to oust Mitch McConnell. That's a huge race. And I very much want to encourage those of you who can travel to Kentucky to campaign for her to do it. And, shout out to our viewers in Lexington, because I know we have a bunch of them. Please keep doing what you're doing. And, again, I want to remind you all, it is one thing to sit behind the computer and post and share memes and all that other sort of stuff. It's quite another thing to get out there and actually speak to your neighbors about the importance of voting. Check in with your neighbors on election day or before election day and make sure that they have a plan. and continuing to do the canvassing, the door-to-door work, the advocacy for the candidates that matter, in any way that you can. And, this is a reminder also that on the issue of gerrymandering, the Obama Foundation is doing a free training on this very shortly, to help advocate against gerrymandering in your community. So there are a lot of things that we can all do. This weekend is a really good weekend to get started. I'm just going to say it. Like, we're heading now into the height of primary season. The first primaries are coming up in the early spring. We need to be in a position where not only for the presidential election, but also for all the local elections that are taking place, we're all doing our part. And there's a couple of really gross races out there. I'm just going to mention this, like Darrell Issa is talking about running for Congress again. We really don't want that. Duncan Hunter needs to be removed from office out here in California. There's just a whole slew of really critical and key races around the country, by the way, that you can also get involved in through fundraising. So every effort that we have needs to be directed in that way. And this weekend's a really good time to get started. All right. Thanks so much, my friends. I will talk to all of you next week. Patreon supporters $10 and up can expect a bonus video today. So keep an eye out for that. And we are having conversations behind the scenes. By the way, I will also just mention this about Patreon tiers and mugs and swag and other sorts of other things that we're going to have coming your way. And we really very much want to thank you all for being here. The weekly podcast is also going up today for those of you who want to listen to it. And we're having a little bit of a debate here. I'll just mention this behind the scenes about maybe bringing a weekly video broadcast back to Facebook, just so there's some accessibility there as well. But we haven't made any decisions about that. So just stay tuned. Okay. And I'll just mention, we are going to be offering a live call at the upper tiers through Crowdcast, where you can actually interact with me directly once a month. I think we're going to do that at $50 and $100, so that there will be opportunities for those of you who want to actually ask questions in real time live to me on the call to do that. All right. So that's it. Much love to all of you, and I will talk to all of you on Monday. Oh, and reminder, next week I'm on the road for this brand new project I'm working on. I know you all want to know about it, but I can't tell you about it yet. But I'm going to be on the road in New York City and then in Boston for a few days next week. So stay tuned to the feed on Patreon to know when the broadcast is going to be. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye.